Hey guys, long time no see. This is the Elite, and this is my Summon Holy Relic Necromancer from the Necropolis League. I am playing this on softcore. However, I am building this in a way where it would be sort of what I would go for on a hardcore. So I am not trying to just, pump damage. I am trying to make sure I have plenty of defenses and consistent defenses at that. Things that I would be happy with, trying to get the build to a point where I would be happy playing it on hardcore if I had all of the gear on hardcore. However, I still need to, get back into the game. It's been a while since I've played, and there's a whole bunch of new content and content that I've never done at this point since it's been a few years. So, yeah, that is why I'm doing softcore. I have been playing Holy Relic since the beginning of the league. I decided to league start it, and there are some issues with it. I would like to try and work on improving that, but as it stands right now, I'm not good at making videos short, so I'm just going to cover where the build is at now and what I went for in total with this build, and a few things about it that I specifically went for. Video's probably still going to be long, let's be honest, and there's going to be plenty of gameplay footage at the end as well, on top of the intro. The middle, where I'm just going through everything, is just going to be, standing in hideout footage, so just fair warning on that. But yeah, anyways, currently I have not cleared any Ubers, but I have done several of the T17 bosses. I did a 70 point feared, as you just saw, and yeah. There are a couple T17s I have left. I would like to try some of the Ubers, except for Exarch. Fuck Exarch. And so hopefully I'll have footage on that in the future. Anyways, time to get into the build. So as I mentioned, I'm not really good at making short videos, so this is probably going to be a long explanation section, just sitting in hideout, explaining all of the things. So let's just start off with the gear. This should be pretty obvious. I mean, you get an extra Holy Relic by wearing Geoffrey's Crest. That's 50% more damage since you go from 2 to 3 relics. Very hard to argue slot. We went for a +2 minion gems corruption. I noticed that there was a 5% max life one on the market, probably came from a Valtempo or something. But I got this really early on. I imagine something like this would be really expensive, and I doubt it's ever worth using double corrupt chambers to go for this. So, yeah. The main thing is the +2 minion gems, which help our support minions, which we'll get into later in the video. But the main thing that I wanted to do with this build was use 4th Vow and the Glorious Vanity Jewels that, in the name of Zabakwa, which gives us Divine Flesh. The reason for that is that it converts elemental damage into chaos. Chaos damage has armor applied to it, which basically mitigates a lot of elemental damage, and also helps us in dealing with penetration that Ubers have, especially things like Shaper Balls. Main reason I went for this, honestly, is because last league I did play a bit, and I ended up going for Lightning Coil setup, which actually kind of made Ubers a lot harder since I didn't have good elemental mitigation. So that was actually the main reason I went for this. But yeah, it's pretty good. I can say that now that I've tried it. We actually go for Severed in Sleep. Now, a lot of the builds you might have been seeing Holy Relic do probably go for a rare. However, there are a few things here. One, you do need another source of Wither in order to hit the cap Wither stacks. The 25% from Necromancer's Unnatural Strength, which gives minions Holy Might, is not enough to hit the 15% Wither stack cap. So you do need more. And Severed in Sleep changes that to 85%. So this makes it very easy for them to reach the 15 Wither stack cap, as long as there isn't something like debuffs on enemies last less time. On top of that, the Envy skill. While relics do a lot of damage on their own, and people that look at PoE might see that immediately and be like, why would you use added damage? There's no damage effectiveness on the skill. Welcome to minion builds, where a lot of things aren't obvious to the naked eye. Summon Holy Relic, according to PoE, and according to how it feels in-game, has a 250% damage effectiveness. So we can juice Envy with Divine Blessing and Awaken Generosity, while still having the Generosity on Malevolence, to have a lot of flat damage, which gets added to our Holy Relic. Now, we have a level 27 Holy Relic, but even though the gem level is that high, Envy is still giving us over 28% more damage. That's a lot. And a lot more than we would get just using a rare. So, yeah, pretty good. Minions having extra chaos resistance, pretty good. The crit multi, maybe useful for a different build in the future where you go crit variant instead. I don't know, but it isn't used on this build. And lastly, the implicit. There is a card for a corrupted Severed in Sleep, and so that makes it really easy to find corruptions for Severed in Sleep, and one with Resolute Technique is very useful because it saves 2 points. Resolute Technique is pretty much required in the build so that you don't have to care about accuracy. So yeah, big benefit to the build. After that, Darkness Enthroned, pretty hard to argue against. You want to minimize the amount of jewels you're using to reach your 100% poison chance. So, Darkness Enthroned makes it so that you only need 5 jewels, which is also the perfect amount for Aminamu's Gaze, which gives you 30% dot multi for your minions, if you have 5 Ghastly Eye jewels. So, yeah, hard to argue against that. Lastly, Ashes of the Stars. This is probably one of the most unfortunate things about this build, is that there isn't really, like, an alternative lower version that you can use earlier on that gives like 10 quality to hit the 30% breakpoint. And the reason that's a problem is because this got moved to Uber Eater. So it's not available early on. It's going to be really hard to get and really expensive, and you want a high roll on the quality if possible. So yeah. However, Ashes of the Stars is awesome on this build. Not only does it help us reach CDR breakpoints on Holy Relic, but it also like gives our Animate Guardian 60% movement speed, super overcaps our Spectre's elemental resistance, lowers the cooldown on Convocation, gives us more curse effect on Despair, you know, things like that. It's actually awesome. It even gives us like 4 projectiles on Lancing Steel. It's sick. So yeah, Ashes of the Stars is really nice. Everything else outside of that is just rares in terms of the gear I'm wearing, resistances and life here. I don't even have quality on these yet. I haven't even fully qualityed the Ashes of the Stars because I'm lazy. I would like to get a better ring, especially rings that have like Redeemer Exalted minion damage on them. But, you know, maybe in the future, I don't know how much more I'll push the gear. Boots, you know, just life, suppression, move speed, obvious stuff, dex to help with the requirements. I'm not totally sold on the implicits that I use here. The stun threshold is really nice because we aren't stun immune, and I don't know if I'll be able to fix that. And the sap ground is just like, okay, well, it lowers enemy damage if they're on it, so yeah, I'll just stop on that. But I might change that in the future. And the gloves, I don't even want to talk about how easily I got these gloves, but they're pretty damn good. I rolled these off of the Fractured base, and yeah, the implicits should be self-explanatory. The shield is a graveyard craft. I actually bought this one because somebody was selling it pretty cheap, and I'm guessing they didn't want the maximum elemental resistances. But I do, because that's pretty nice. Basically, you need to go for like a 6-mod Fossilized Spirit Shield with like 9,000 gem chance, 5,000 minion chance, and like 2,000 life chance, and then a little bit of other things being scarcer. And the main things you care about are the prefixes, the +1 minion gems, the life, and the minion damage. This is a lot of damage for your build. So yeah, quite good. The crit, I don't really care about. The life is a nice bonus, but the all resistance is sick. I was actually planning on doing something with this where I like try to annul a suffix and then like add suppression to it, but I found out that I could get suppression capped without it, so I just stuck with this. And yeah, Flasks, evasion rating armor, curse reduction, movement speed. This, if I ever get a corrupted blood immunity jewel, will be changed to a poison removal flask instead of the bleed flask. The reason for that is I actually have tattooed 100% avoid bleed on my tree, thinking that it would work on Corrupting Blood, but it unfortunately doesn't. So, if I get a Corrupted Blood Jewel, though, which shouldn't be the hardest thing in the world, I guess, then I will definitely switch to a Poison Removal Flask, because then I'll be able to completely ignore Bleed. And yeah, that pretty much sums up the gear. I suppose since we're talking about tree stuff, we should probably transition into tree stuff. I guess jewels also, first and foremost, because that's also technically a part of your gear. This cluster jewel, I-84, the main thing I wanted on it was 35% increased effect. I got a sick augment, and then I got a sick regal, and then I, like, exalted cold resistance on top, and it was just like, okay, well, I guess I win. I went for an 8 passive here. I wasn't actually sure how many passes I want, but 8 seems to be pretty much perfect in giving us leeway for other things. I can't really ask for a better roll than this at this point, but yeah. This is pretty much just, like, awesome. It's perfect. As I mentioned, you want Abyssal Jewels, five rare ones to get your poison chance capped out. This cooldown recovery rate on this jewel, by the way, does not matter for the relics. That only applies to you, doesn't apply to your minions. So please keep that in mind. This 2% isn't actually that important. Hinder's a nice bonus as well. Already talked about Amanamu's Gaze, already talked about Divine Flesh, although I didn't mention what I'm getting out of it. I'm currently getting like 10% life, and I'm actually getting 2% suppression. This 2% suppression might look like it's capping me if you just import my character really quickly, but it's not actually that important because we are using Green Nightmare. This thing is basically giving us 19% suppression for one jewel socket, and it would be giving us more if we changed these dexterity nodes to cold resistance tattoos, which do actually work with Green Nightmare. So yeah. Other than that, the only other jewel socket to mention is Watcher's Eye. I mainly went for a phys damage reduction determination, and I also decided to look for unaffected by vulnerability, because being able to ignore vulnerability on map mods is awesome, and physical damage is definitely my weakest point, and especially because of the fact that T17s have that triple curse mod where you have vulnerability, Ellie weakness, and temp chains. This basically meant that mod did nothing for me because I'm super overcapped for elemental weakness. Temp chains gets mitigated by Garb of the Ephemeral, my Animate Guardian, which I'll go into later, and vulnerability was the only issue. This completely eliminates it. 2-mod Watcher's Eye is probably going to be pretty hard to get on hardcore, to be fair, but the main thing was the phys damage reduction, which is really nice. Other things on the tree, I've gone over the jewels. The rest of the stuff should be fairly self-explanatory. We mainly want life, resistances, minion damage stuff where possible, enough aura reservation efficiency stuff so that we can run 3 50% auras, which is why we use the Charisma Anoint. And we do actually take Spiritual Command so that minion attack speed applies to us. This helps us with these nodes being very nice, and these nodes are nice anyways because we do have support specters and we do care about them hitting things, so they aren't completely useless even though they have no effect, like even though the attack and cast speed has no effect on the relics. They're just really nice. Also bonus for letting Feeding Frenzy's attack speed bonus apply to us too. Eldritch Battery should be obvious. We need to be able to cast a Divine Blessing. Obviously, we have suppression stuff. And Masteries, we have 10% of Fizz taken as Chaos. I think this is the only Fizz taken as that we have right now. Maybe I could use Taste of Hate in the future. I don't know. But because of the fact that we don't have a rare helmet, we don't really have good sources of it, and this is just really nice in general with Fourth Vow. We also have taken Leash Shade. Now, this is definitely optional, but Leash Shade is good on like almost every single one of the Ubers. Simply because a lot of them have attacks that inflict heavy amounts of dot damage, and this gives you a lot of time to react to that dot damage by making you take way less damage from it in exchange for the ailment duration. However, we're already completely elemental ailment immune. We're bordering on bleed immune. And even when you're not bleed immune, you can limit the amount of poison damage you take because of how good the Pantheon is, which limits the amount of poisons you can take to 3 stacks. So that should pretty much sum up the past. I forgot to talk about the Ascendancy Points, so let's go over that really quickly. Obviously, we have to go through Mindless Aggression to get to these points. And you might be, the more observant people might be like, hey, physical damage can already poison. Do you really need Unholy Might? And the answer is technically no, but this is a very big damage increase, even though it doesn't increase our poison damage, other than giving us more Wither on hit chance, which is actually pretty nice. However, we aren't just only dealing poison damage, we actually have on-hit damage, and Wither stacks will increase that on-hit damage. This ultimately results in the Unholy Might node actually being like a 14% or 15% damage increase. Post-production Uber here. Also want to mention it also makes Fizz Reflect maps completely free, simply because your minions aren't going to die to Fizz Reflect. It's not like you're doing enough damage for Fizz Reflect to matter for you. Bone Barrier is really nice, extra Fizz damage reduction, and we get some leech from our minions. Now, we don't need to totally rely on this leech for reasons I'll get into later when I'm going over the links. But also we get extra life added as extra energy shield, which also will be explained why this is so awesome in a little bit. But talking about Plaguebringer, we go for this over Mistress of Sacrifice because I don't want to have to invest in the block. I'm already investing into a lot of stuff, and it's really hard to fit block into the build. On top of that, it requires an extra socket and is especially annoying to use in boss fights, especially when you are not using a rare sword, so that you can just automate it. We can utilize Plaguebringer's damage effects very easily in boss fights. We are actually ignoring the area of effect bonus, even though it is kind of nice on the relics. It's not the most important thing in the world. So what we are doing to utilize Plaguebringer is we have an Unearth gem socketed into our sockets. Now, what this basically does is lets us place a bunch of corpses around our arena, and so wherever we move in the arena, Plaguebringer is always going to be active, which means we're always getting that more damage, and enemies are always getting their damage reduced. So, very, very consistent for boss arena type fights and stuff. Very easy to set up. Unearth has an extremely quick cast speed and animation, so, like, just tapping it, I'm casting it here. Barely even see that I'm casting it, so yeah, it's very nice. And it's better than Desecrate since you only lay 1 corpse at a time, and you're limited on how many corpses you can lay. I suppose I should get into the links on that note. Summon Holy Relic is supported by Void Manipulation, Minion Damage, and Power. Those should all be obvious. Awaken Unbound Ailments, incredibly strong on Poison, and the last link is a little bit weird because it's Predator. Now, Signal Prey, which is what gives them more damage on like a boss or whatever, doesn't actually make them prioritize the boss. You still have to have them be the closest, like have the boss be the closest thing to them in order for them to target the boss. So that's a pretty odd part about it, but it is a really, really strong link. Technically speaking, if you have a +1 all gems chest and a level 4 enhance, that could replace this. It would be a little bit less damage, but it would make the proc rate higher, and so it would feel way nicer on clear. Would be more reliable on wither stacks, especially on debuffs expiring faster T17 maps. And yeah. So you can also replace this with something like Energy Leech. Holy Relics, even without the Necro Ascendancy node, have a lot of ES. So with Energy Leech, they're basically never going to die. So that is definitely an option. I've used that a few times in certain content, like Simulacrum, to make sure that they don't die, and Energy Leech does work really well. Outside of that, the trigger for it is Lancing Steel of Spraying. Now, we have returning projectiles on this to make it hit more often and make it a little more consistent. lets us move around a bit while it's still firing. And we also have faster attacks on it. We don't have any attack speed on the weapon like all of the rare weapon users have. So instead of using Withering Touch, which they basically have to use instead, we get to use faster attacks. The last link is life gain on hit. Now, we have minion damage being leached to us, but there are cases where enemies can't have life leached from them. So, life gain on hit lets us ignore that, and basically gives us even better sustain because it's instant. Life gain on hit is actually so sick. Obviously, you could technically just, like, use shield charge here instead and be able to move around the map faster, but life gain on hit is honestly really amazing for being able to tank stuff and then just, like, heal back the damage like nothing happened on top of all of that leech. Auras, Determination, Purity of Elements. Determination gives us the armor that we need for physical damage, the majority of it, and also for 4th Vow. Purity of Elements gives us a bunch of elemental resistances, and we are super overcapped. We can basically run blue altars with the Elder's Gaze Nose and not even care about it. Even in an elite weakness map, we are very, very overcapped, and it also gives us elemental ailment immunity. So amazing. Lastly, we have Malevolence on Generosity. And on top of that, we run Envy, as mentioned before, with Generosity and Divine Blessing. Now, the fact that it is given by an item means that we can use the same Generosity for Malevolence and Envy both without having to worry about the fact that we wouldn't be able to put a Divine Blessing onto Envy. So that's a really cool thing about this setup. Molten Shell, really good because we have armor. Vow Molten Shell, really nice for, you know, just mitigating damage. We don't have it on cast on damage taken, and there are some gems you could probably replace it with, especially while mapping, such as you don't really need the Unearth for mapping, and you probably don't technically need the Convocation. But it is really nice to have to keep minions next to you, and there are some cases where minions might need a little bit of extra healing. Despair should be very obvious, and Flame Dash, we need some sort of movement. We can't just be walking around, especially with this slow speed. We need some sort of blink skill. Blink skills are just, like, required. And outside of that, as mentioned before, we have support minions in the helmet. And I'm sure that people that don't like Animate Guardian will hate to see it, but Animate Guardian is here. Linked to Feeding Frenzy for extra damage, and Meat Shield for giving them some tank. We also have Raise Spectre. Raise Spectres will be listed in the description, but basically we have Wild Bristle Matron, which is from Harvest. This thing has an attack that guarantees a stun, and it has another attack, which is like a war cry that slows things by up to 40%. And it is really funny when it goes off. Here's an Aziri clip to show off for that. That fucking 40% slow! The other ones are Pale Seraphim, which has a increased damage taken debuff on one of its attacks, as well as an action speed slow. Yes, we have Wither, and it's additive with the Wither, but more damage is always good. And then the last one is the Storm Conduit, which is from Allflame Ember of Valaco. This thing has a laser with a 12.5 second cooldown that guarantees shock with a 300% increased duration on the shock and increased shock effect, and it does insane amounts of damage and has bonus damage to monsters. So, like, it is insane. By itself, with basically no support on it, it basically just one-shots any non-boss. And even on bosses, if you go back to the beginning of the video, you can see bosses have like 18% shocks on them because of the beam this thing has. It is really strong. And on top of that, we don't even need the max life gained as ES node for them. They have like really high life baseline already, and then they have 300% of that life gained as ES implicitly. It's ridiculous. They are amazing as a support Spectre. So, yeah. Animate Guardian's gear, on the other hand, we are using Garb of the Ephemeral, which basically gives us action speed, slow immunity, and crit immunity when they're near us. Windscream and Asenath's Gentle Touch. Now, there's a cool thing here, that basically lets us get Dual Curse without investing in Dual Curse. Gets us the Temp Chains to increase our poison duration, which is a significant DPS increase, and also gives us explosions on the enemy, which helps our clear substantially. And this explosion damage actually gets affected by the minion damage because it's on the Guardian, at least as far as I can tell. Which also probably means that the explosions can wither, they can poison, it's probably converted to chaos even. It's pretty nice. The last thing is the weapon. You can pick between Kingmaker, which does give Fortify when the Guardian is nearby, or Dying Breath, which is actually a little bit more damage than Culling Strike technically is, which basically lets us finish fights 10% faster. Dying Breath is a little bit better because of the curse effect primarily. But Kingmaker does give us Fortify. It is, unfortunately, a little bit unreliable ever since 3.6 Synthesis League, where they lowered the radius to 30 units. But, I mean, it's there pretty often, especially because it has a shit ton of move speed. So, yeah. Now, the most important part of the Guardian, and the thing I alluded to earlier with Bonebearer, is the helmet is Mask of the Stitch Demon. This is from Incursion. It's an upgraded helmet. And it gives it life regen based on the amount of ES it has. For every 500 ES it has, it gets 1% of its life regenerated per second. If you can put the puzzle pieces together, it's getting a shit ton of life regen because it has 40% of its life gained as ES. Basically, this thing regenerates like 40% of its life per second. I've seen it take boss DD before and drop to like 20%, and then it's back to full within 2 seconds. And I don't recommend trying that, but yeah, that is a thing. Since we mentioned Animate Guardian survivability, I want to take a little bit to talk about how to keep it alive, because I have not had a single Animate Guardian death. The only close calls I've had were doing things like Guardians with destructive play, and Maven summons a Lyra and a boss gets detonated on the Animate Guardian, which thankfully has not been able to kill it. Has come very close though. I would not be like, I wouldn't want to risk it, even though I now have a max res shield. The main thing though is I've seen a lot of people complaining about T17s, and I think the worst offender of it is Abomination map and this T17 pack in general. This pack can roll on other maps, but it will show up as Charred Beasts on the Necropolis UI. These have Wretched Defilers that spawn in with high HP corpses already available to resurrect, so the first attack they can do is resurrect these corpses, which, after you kill them, will then explode after a short duration. These explosions are extremely broken. They do a ton of HP damage. Like, as in, it converts HP to damage type thing. You know, the thing that Detonate Dead does. So, seriously, like, if you've seen Alkaiser's death to it, those things, like, Alkaiser was tanky. Those things do a ton of damage. And even in isolated testing, these things just do way too much damage. I've had this problem with Revenants in general, and these are basically an even worse version. But while we're in the Necropolis League, you could just use an All-Flame member, replace it with, like, rats, with, like, Legion bullshit, with, like, Breach bullshit, as long as you just get rid of them. Please, get rid of them. Like, this is definitely, like, the biggest cause of people losing their Guardians from T17 so far that I've seen. If they don't nerf these guys, then, yeah, we can complain, because they really do need to nerf them when we can't replace them. One thing I specifically want to shout out for in terms of content to run with this build is Blight. I immediately went into Blight the moment that I started playing this build for Forbidden League. I was immediately like, this is probably going to own in Blight, and yes, it does. It is one of the best builds for Blight that I've ever played. So I really do think if you're trying this build, even if you're not like, even if Blight isn't the most profitable thing in the world, even if, you know, you're not like the biggest fan of Blight, unless you're stuck on DirectX 11, don't run Blight if you're stuck on DirectX 11. please run DirectX 12 for Blight, otherwise you're going to have 1 FPS. Yeah, I would highly recommend trying out Blight on this build. It's really nice. It's probably the best build I've played for Blight stuff. Very, very enjoyable experience. Super chill. Of course, you're still going to need to, like, build towers and stuff. The nature of Holy Relic, and there's proximity shields and Blight sometimes and all of that stuff. You're still going to want to build, you know, towers, and definitely want to invest in, like, the chill tower thing, at least. But, yeah. It's really, really easy to do Blight on this build. It's awesome. I really like it. But yeah, now that we're done with the Blight stuff and all of the gear stuff and all of that, I don't think there's anything I specifically forgot. There's going to be stuff in the description. There might be a pinned comment if I forgot stuff. But yeah. Anyways, here's some more gameplay, some Simulacrum, and some other things that I recorded. Have a good one. And again, this is using Energy Leech instead of Predator. So I'm missing a good amount of damage. Yep. I don't know if they need Energy Leech at this point, but... GG.
So be it. Keep your precious sanity, my agent of chaos. You shall serve me well.
Oh my god, I actually got into 4 rows. I remember 3 rows used to be fucking pretty good.